We're told time and time again how typically English this guy is. He's called Wyatt. You show me any bloke in England who's called Wyatt. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. Today I'm doing a bit of a delayed wrap up of March because, as some of you may have noticed, I didn't film last week. I think that might be the first week that I've ever skipped in my time on BookTube. But I just had a crazy busy week at work, really quite stressful. I had no spare time to film. And then this week, the kids have been off on their Easter holidays and it's just been a bit go, go, go. Plus, with all of that stuff with work going on, I was feeling a bit down and just not motivated to watch any BookTube, comment on any BookTube, least alone make my own video. But I'm back and I'm feeling better. The week with the kids has really done me good. But with all that, my reading has kind of suffered. I haven't finished one of my books for March, which was Ita Frum's A Woman Is No Man, and I haven't even started The Metal Heart by, I can't even remember who that was by. I'll put it on the screen. And I'm also now like 3 books behind on my April reading, so it did take a bit of a hit, but I have taken next week off of work as well, but the kids are with their dad for the whole week, so I've got that whole week to myself to catch up on reading. And then there's Dewey's 24-hour readathon at the end of the month as well, so I'm not particularly stressed about it. I guess another part of the reason why I haven't read as much as I had hoped to is because I have discovered TikTok, and so any free time I do have, I've been pissing it away on that. But that's been quite helpful actually. I found a whole community of people on weight loss journeys and I have restarted mine, so that's been really helpful, and actually I think that's another reason why my mood has lifted again this week. But enough about me. What did I actually manage to read in March? Well, I read 9 books, one of which was a 5-star, 6 were 4 stars, and another 2 were 3 stars. So it was a pretty good reading month. And I know 9 books probably isn't something to be sniffed at either. I just think I maybe had slightly higher, or too high expectations on what I would get read. But anyway, the first book, my 5-star book, was The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Colins. This I had been really looking forward to. I think the premise sounds really interesting. I mean, and the gorgeous cover. But I really liked the fact that this book shines a light on Britain's role in the slave trade. It's kind of always viewed more as a blight on America's history. And whilst we know that Britain loved to colonise, we don't really talk about that link to slavery. Is much more cleverly hidden in our history, but this book really discusses it. It opens with a court case which is causing quite a stir in 1800s London because Frannie, a housemaid, has been accused of murdering her employer and his wife. Did she do it? Not even Frannie really knows. So instead what she does is she tells her lawyer her story, from being born on a plantation in Jamaica, being plucked from the fields to work in the big house, from her passage to London, where she finds herself in a relationship which would rock polite society, and in the process she exposes many more crimes than just the one that she is accused of. So this isn't just a whodunit, it's an indictment of race science, air quotes with that one, and the men who are so desperate to make their name and their prejudices synonymous with how an entire group of people should be viewed and treated. This is a slow burn of a book as Frannie kind of builds up and peels away each of the layers of who she is, what's happened to her, her character, and the rights and wrongs done both to and by her. And it's told in prose that's really quite elegant, but it isn't too beautiful to delve into the ugliness of what she has experienced. There's really few likeable characters in this book. Even Frannie herself kind of pushes those boundaries of sympathy, but despite that, I did find myself rooting for her. I think this is a story that really explores the shockwaves of trauma, both on an individual level but on a global scale as well. I found the story of Frannie's mistress particularly interesting because she's kind of like, you know, when you do lifeguard skills when you're learning to swim, and they always warn you of like the drowning person who could potentially sink the person who's trying to save them. That really made me think of the mistress in this book. She's dragging others down with her as she is sinking herself. So this is not a light read, but it's a really good one. I really enjoyed this book and I'm so glad it lived up to my expectations. Now on to my 4-star reads, one of which I only just finished a couple of days ago, and that was Night Waking by Sara Moss. If you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I was really keen to read more Sara Moss after I loved and adored Summerwater when I read it last year. And I chose this one as my next Sara Moss because it basically sounds like it was written just for me. It's set in Scotland. It's about a mother who is struggling with looking after 2 young boys, and there's also a subplot with a midwife in it, like all of the yes. So this is about Anna, who is an academic and a mother, and she is struggling to finish the book that her career, which has been hit badly by motherhood because she works in a really patriarchal institution, it's been hit badly by that, and this book is really the thing that her whole career hinges on. But she's struggling to juggle that and all the caring and cleaning and cooking responsibilities that come with motherhood, and isn't very well supported by her, quite frankly, fucking useless husband. Her desire to be alone, to focus on her work, and her conflicting feelings about her role as a mother really weigh quite heavily on her. And then she's further distracted from her work by the discovery of the skeleton of a baby in their garden, and a dysfunctional family that comes to stay as their first visitors on the island off the Scottish coast in which they're living. This is an island that belongs to her husband's family, and they've done up part of it for visitors. And then alongside Anna's storyline, we have letters from a midwife from the 1800s, and she's been sent to the island tasked with bringing modern medicine to the crofters who live there on behalf of the landlord. And she comes up against stoic silence, real reluctance from the islanders to even engage with her, let alone welcome this modern medicine. And so she finds herself fighting a losing battle against superstition, tradition, and the language barrier of Gaelic, because she hasn't even bothered to learn the language before she went there. I'm always interested in stories about motherhood, particularly ones that paint a really honest light on it. Shine a really honest light on it. We all know that the mythological perfect mother doesn't exist, but those expectations and pressures do persist. But while Anna clearly does love her children, she simultaneously feels that she's failing and she longs to escape. We're given unfiltered access to her thoughts, and I found her really refreshing. She's quite funny, and although her life is a privileged one, I could really recognise the internal struggles that she's facing. I will say, I think anyone picking this up expecting a mystery will probably be disappointed, because this is just pure literary fiction. The discovery of the baby's skeleton is really just a way to get into that story of the history of the island, of those Highland clearances, and how the islanders were treated by the English family, Anna's husband's family, at that point in history. I really enjoyed the letters from the midwife, and also kind of piecing together who the baby was, but it's just a side plot. It's not the main driver of the story at all. But I thought that side of the story gave a real keen look at the realities of those who lived in the Highlands at the time, and more depth to what I knew about the Highland clearances. We covered that part of our history in school, but I always think a book like this really brings to life the social aspects of it much better than you would ever get in a history class. And it raises some really good points about the benefits that people even today are still enjoying from colonialism and treating other people badly to profit from them, basically. I thought the writing in this book, it's atmospheric, it's really observational, and much like with Summerwater, there were moments of almost acerbic wit, and I really love that, and this has definitely cemented Sara Moss as one of my new favourite writers. And then next we have the March pick for the Read Under the Bed book club with Scott and Nell over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. We haven't had the discussion on this book yet. In fact, with all the other stuff, being unmotivated and being busy and everything, I haven't actually engaged in even the chat. So I don't know what is actually the plan with this, but I thought I would just give it a little review anyway. I hope that's not spoilery. But this was On Black Sister Street by Chika Unigwe. And this book puts into words why the only real area or issue that I struggle with in my feminism is the world of sex work. Because while I totally accept that there's many that work in the sex industry who are doing so willingly, safely, and with autonomy, it's the stories of those who are not so privileged that make me very angry and upset, and makes me question, you know, does your average punter know the difference between these two groups? Do they care? And does having like a legitimate side of the sex industry add a legitimacy that absolutely shouldn't be there to this other unregulated, basically slavery side of sex work? Because the women in this book are slaves. Trafficked people in general are slaves, but they're often hidden in such plain sight and mingling with people who are not so shackled that it probably makes it so easy for so many to not see them, to deny they even exist, and to claim there isn't a problem. But there is a problem, and it's huge. And whilst that problem exists, can anyone, even the ones who are there willingly, ever really truly be respected, valued, or more importantly, safe? Because this book is about 3 Nigerian women and 1 Sudanese woman who has come to the red light district in Antwerp, where they all live and work through Nigeria as well. They work as prostitutes in the hopes that they'll be able to pay off the massive debt they owe to their pimp, in the hopes of gaining some sort of freedom and some sort of life. When one of the women is found dead, the others start to open up to each other in ways that they never have before. They share stories of their lives, who they were, what happened to them, and how they came to find themselves in Belgium. And the kind of umbrella over all of their stories is the story of the dead woman, who had come to find herself, and she had been an educated, ambitious young woman, how she come to find herself thousands of miles away from home, using a name no one knew who she really was, and now she has been found dead. This is a powerful book that covers a lot of really painful subjects, not least of all sexual abuse. Like, none of the women in this book have an inspirational story. They have all experienced trauma, whether that be war, neglect, incest, rape, poverty, parental alcoholism. They might have had to leave children behind. They may have been duped into coming into this line of work. And, you know, it's just case after case of men abusing, raping, and using women. So, in a way, I shouldn't have been able to keep reading this book, or at least not felt compelled to, but I was. And I think, although the writing in this book is fine, like, it's not gonna blow most people away, but what I think Unigwe is really good at is dialogue, and particularly weaving English with the kind of pidgin spoken language that they use in Nigeria, because I felt it really sparked, to me at least, you know, clearly not Nigerian, never been to Nigeria, but for me it felt really authentic, and it almost felt as if I was listening in on these conversations. You know, they weren't conversations written for the page. These were genuine conversations that I as a reader was not actually supposed to be privy to. And it was that made me feel really connected to the characters and really wanted to know what had happened to them, was, you know, hoping for the best outcomes for them. So for me, this book really did hit the mark. It is compelling, and it's holding out these big issues that the world really needs to be paying more attention to. So again, great pick, Scott and Nell. And then another 4-star was Will and Testament by Vigdis Hjorth. So this is about a woman whose name I'm probably going to butcher. Hjorth. She's in her 50s, she's a divorced mum of 3, and she's been estranged from her family for a long time. At first, we don't really know why she's estranged from them, but it's obvious that something happened in her early years that she has tried to suppress until she became a mother herself. When her family refused to believe her, she distanced herself from them. But now, I think it's decades later, she's the second oldest of the family, and she's drawn back into it by her older brother to support him as a dispute about inheritance is kind of bubbling over. He's also distanced himself from the family and is quite angry that the apparently equal inheritance of the 4 siblings is majorly skewed due to an undervaluation which is going to benefit the younger 2 sisters. And in being drawn into this dispute, Hjorth is consumed by her memories and her feelings of anger and disbelief that her family continue to dismiss her trauma. This book is a powerful read. It throws up a lot to think about the nature of trauma and its legacy and the damage that can be done by encouraging victims to forgive and forget or to keep the peace. At times you really feel like you're in Bergot's head. It veers into this stream of consciousness, which I'm not always a huge fan of, but it really worked in this book because I felt angry on her behalf and really incensed at how her family treated her. She's not always a sympathetic character, but you can often see why some of the choices she's made in her life over the years have been a product of the trauma that she suffered. I read this as a work of fiction, but I've since heard that actually this is based quite heavily on her life, and I am astounded and can't imagine the toll it might have taken on her to write this book. I really hope it was cathartic. And I'm just in awe because I don't think I could process certain things in my life in such a cohesive and effective way. I really enjoyed that. And then a book that I don't even think I had on any of my TBRs that I've shared on here. This was a Shelterbox book club pick that I was really far behind on. I think this might have been the January or February ones. I think it was February actually, but this is We the Survivors by Tash Aw. And because I was behind in it and I had other things on my TBR, I kind of read this really slowly, bits and pieces, whilst I was reading other books, and I don't generally have more than 1 book on the go at a time. And I feel with this one, I'm annoyed at myself that I did that because I think I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more if I had devoted my time solely to it. But I still think this is a really good book. So on the surface, this looks like it's the story of a man called Hjorth. He is a Chinese man who grew up in a Malaysian fishing village, and he's been interviewed after serving time for a murder. His crime and his victim are known, but what isn't known is why he did it. And Hjorth spends time really looking back at his life, not just the events that directly led up to him murdering a man, but everything from childhood. And that's where this book dives a lot deeper, and it looks at the immigrant experience, migrant workers, class, poverty. Lots of different issues come up in this book. And I won't lie, this is quite a stark and bleak book, but I was really invested in not only why Hjorth had killed someone, but also in understanding the trajectory of his life, because for me actually that murder is not the most devastating or interesting thing about his story. I will say that some of my enjoyment of this story was probably in learning more about a country and a culture that I hadn't understood before, but that isn't to say that it doesn't have its own merit, because I really liked the almost memoir-like quality of this book. I found it really compelling. Yes, I've said that word again. I need a thesaurus. Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting look at this man's life. And then we'll go to my net galleys for the last 4 books. So it's the last 2 4 stars and then my 2 3 stars as well. They were all net galleys. The first of which was The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac by Louise Kennedy. This came out on the 8th of April, so it came out this week. And I picked this up because it's a short story collection. I knew nothing of the author, but I was keen to get another short story collection because I've had really good experiences with short story collections. Like I've absolutely loved The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, To Be a Man by Nicole Krauss. I can't think of any off the top of my head, like Mouthing the Words by Julie Oranger. And so that's kind of my benchmark, and actually this one came pretty near to that. This is a collection of stories about Irish women who are reaching a turning point or difficulties after a traumatic experience or events, which makes it sound like it's going to be a really bleak read. And some of these stories are quite dark, but it doesn't feel murky because I think because of Kennedy's writing. She has a really strong voice, it's really authentic, and she puts her characters into some really interesting situations. I can't remember if when I picked this up I knew she was an Irish author, but you know that these are Irish stories almost right from the start, and I think that really shows how strong her writing style is. So like we have a woman who's been abandoned by her husband and is living isolated from the community alone in this building development that he's fled from. It's half finished and she's alone and is looked upon badly by the community. Then we have a woman who's being punished in quite a manipulative way by her husband after a choice she's made. There's issues around the IRA and the kind of English-Irish relationships. There's a pregnant woman whose husband has found himself literally in bed with gangsters after turning to them for help with a debt that he was struggling with. And they feel really, all of them really felt authentically rooted in Irish life, and there is that kind of Irish wit in them as well. And I just thought it was a really rich collection, and I will definitely look out for more of this author's work in the future. So that was a definite 4-star. My next 4-star was Lean Full Stand by John McGregor, which comes out at the end of the month on the 29th of April. So I'd said in my TBR video that I picked this up purely because it was written by John McGregor, because on the surface it didn't look like a book I would actually want to read because it's about an Arctic exploration. I really loved his book, If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things. It was one of the first books I read as getting back into reading as an adult, and I wanted to see if I still enjoy his writing now. And it's funny because although I was so dubious about that Antarctic setting, I was really drawn into the opening of the book, which is about 3 men who are carrying out studies in Antarctica in this completely isolated station. They find themselves in a really dangerous situation, and one of the men, who's the only experienced member of the team, is incapacitated and fails to make a crucial action to avoid a tragic incident. This section had me totally glued to the pages, especially when it becomes apparent what the nature of that incapacity is. I won't give any spoilers, but I just thought this was so well done. The book then totally switches location and pace when John McGregor takes us back to England to look at the world of asphasia and rehabilitation. But I found this bit just as compelling as the first. We join a speech therapy group and a wife who is struggling with her new caring role for a husband that she's actually lived quite a separate life from, and now he relies on her for every one of his needs. I thought this book was a really kind of raw look at how we often take our health for granted, but how it can change in a second, and the repercussions of that can reach much further than just the person who is experiencing that ill health. You know, there's no saints or heroes or whatever in this book. It's just about how people are flung without any preparation into either the patient or carer role, and how they have to just kind of sink or swim with that. There's identities and relationships, and how telling our stories is really important. They're all at the core of this story, and wrapped up in writing and a plot that I had pretty much come to expect from John McGregor. I thought this was a really great book. And then on to my 3-star books, the first of which was Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura, which is out on the 22nd of April. And I feel before I talk about the actual book, I'm just going to say a little bit about how this book has been marketed, because I have some issues with it. I had seen it being said that it was recommended for readers who loved convenience store women. And I'm not entirely sure why, beyond the fact that they're both written by Japanese authors and they're both set in Japan, because they deal with very different characters, very different situations, and they're quite different in style as well. So I would just put a word of caution out there for that, because if you are expecting another convenience store woman, you might feel a little bit shortchanged, but that doesn't actually say anything about the quality or the story or anything. I found this book was a bit of a mix. I think there are some people who are not going to like it, and I think there's some people that are going to be really, really quite hardcore fans for it. This is a story that starts with a teenage girl called Kokoro who has been quite badly bullied at school to the point where she now no longer attends because she's terrified of what would happen. She's also terrified about opening up to anyone, so she spends her days at home going over what had happened and what she should now do. Until one day, the mirror in her bedroom starts to glow and she is pulled through it into a castle with six, I think, other teenagers. And a little girl in a wolf mask tells them the rules. They can come to the castle every day between 9 and 5 and do whatever they want in the castle. There's also a hidden key and a wish room, and the person who finds the key and enters the wish room first will have their wish granted. The only rule is that they have to leave by 5 o'clock every day, otherwise they will be eaten. Which, okay then. So I felt this story was as much about, or more about, the characters than it is about that kind of fantasy element. And I thought I'd be relieved by that because I was a bit worried going into it because I'm not a big fan of fantasy. I often don't connect with it. But I actually thought there was something really compelling about this lonely castle and this creepy little wolf girl. So I was actually disappointed that those elements didn't have a bigger presence in the story. And then that was compounded by the fact that although this is quite character driven, I really felt that we didn't get close to any of the characters. I felt like I was being kept at arm's length, and I don't know if that was maybe a cultural thing or a translation thing, because other Japanese books that I've read have felt similarly kind of clipped and spare, but this book, in a way that those others didn't, this book felt like I was being offered a sorbet when I was actually fucking starving. So, you know, it tasted nice, but it didn't fill me up. But saying that, I did actually like a lot of the parts of this story. I loved the metaphor of the castle being, you know, a place that you could run away to when you want to escape your life. And I also thought the writing was quite elegant, and I thought that some of the darker subjects, more sensitive subjects that were dealt with were done so in a really, well, sensitive way. And I really like that blend of the fantastical with the real. Like, is there a fantasy version of magical realism, like fantastical realism? I actually really liked that. And the ending of this book I absolutely loved. I just thought it was quite touching and powerful. So yeah, a mixed feeling about this one, but I am glad I read it. And then my final book and my final 3-star was Jodi Picoult's The Book of Two Ways. This actually came out in October last year. It was one of the books that kind of got lost in my backlog. But, you know, she's such a huge author. I don't think one late review is going to really keep her up at night. And I was really intrigued by the kind of sliding doors-ness of the premise of this book. And I think that's probably why I picked it up, because I can't say a book about Egyptology would usually have made its way onto my TBR. But this book, it is and it isn't sliding doors. So Dawn is on a flight when she hears those words that you never want to hear, prepare for a crash landing. But miraculously, she survives the accident and the airline offer her onward travel to wherever she wants to go. But where is that? Is it back to her husband and her daughter where she was traveling in the first place? Or is it to a archaeological dig site in Egypt where she had to abandon her PhD and her first ever love when she was required to go back home to care for her dying mother and then later take responsibility for her teenage brother? In this book, we get to see what happens when she does both. So Dawn works as a death doula and we get to see her doing her day job, and I thought that was really interesting, as well as seeing her struggle with things in her marriage. But then we also get to see her travel back to her first loves, both in the shape of Wyatt, who was kind of her academic enemy turned lover, and her passion for an ancient Egyptian burial custom called the Book of Two Ways. And through the telling of these two stories, we come to understand how she found herself in the place where she was in her life at the start of the book. And it throws up a lot of interesting things about missed opportunities, you know, regrets, and the paths that we do or do not take in our lives. And I saw a lot of reviewers on Goodreads criticising how much Egyptology there is in this book, and it also dives into quantum physics as well. And you know, I get that I don't really have an interest or an understanding of either of those things, and I probably wouldn't have been wanting to read a book about those things, but I think it did add an element which for me I did quite enjoy to the book. What I did have an issue with is that we are told numerous times that Dawn's love interest is you know, an English Marcus. He is very typically English. Typically, we're told time and time again how typically English this guy is. He's called Wyatt. You show me any bloke in England who's called Wyatt. Anyway, so Jodi Picoult is a big writer. I've read a couple of her books. I enjoyed them. I've got a few more on my shelves to pick up at some point. She has a huge back catalogue and a huge fan base. But while I've enjoyed what I've read so far, I wouldn't say that she's like a favourite author of mine. And I think this book confirmed this. I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. It was 3 stars. Whew. So that was all the books that I did manage to read in March. It's felt good to sit in front of the camera again, actually, but I really need to finish up now because I'm meant to be taking my son to the park to meet his friend in 1 minute's time. I can't believe I got this whole video done in that time. Hopefully I'll have the time to edit it tonight so it can go up tomorrow morning, but I'm hoping next week, while I've got some time and space to think about things and do things that are actually for me, I'm going to start my kind of, I think it's going to be like a Friday reads on a Wednesday. So fingers crossed you will see me then. And until then, bye. That is the bin men just pulled up. Fantastic.